Hello, Bio 20. We're going to start our day with a little bit of a review of photosynthesis, something you've talked about in Science 9 a tiny little bit, and some stuff you've seen in Science 10. So in your notes, we are following underneath the part that says review. So we're going to go with, where do organisms attain their energy? Well, it's from food. If you didn't know that, I guess. But essentially, you eat. And when you eat, you get energy. And that is how we obtain all of our energy. And we're going to go into the story of how it breaks down so we can get that energy. So there's two types of organisms and two types of ways that they obtain their food. So the first one is called an autotroph. You may remember this from grade 7. You may have heard of them known as producers. So producers use sunlight directly to make their own food. They're the things like the plants, the trees, the flowers, the grass, the photosynthetic algae, which we'll talk about in a bit. These are things that make food from the direct sunlight. Heterotrophs, or a consumer, is something that consumes food. So we are an example of a heterotroph. We need to eat other things to obtain our energy. We need to eat different types of plants, different animals, okay? We eat those things. When we consume our food, we can obtain energy from them. So in your notes, you should define these two parts that are in red underneath autotrophs and heterotrophs. Here's a little review of the plant cell and the animal cell. So you may remember from Science 10, they're shaped different. One square, one circle, one has a cell wall, one has a massive vacuole. But essentially, they're similar in many ways. But the one thing you have to understand that's super important about a plant cell, especially for this unit, is that plant cells have something called a chloroplast. So if you're looking at my lovely diagram right here, okay, this chloroplast is going to drive the conversation through photosynthesis. So in your notes, highlight that chloroplast, as well as you will notice there's something called a mitochondria. If we're looking here, it's right here. Well, where did it go? That's really good, guys. I'm glad I can see it. There it is. Here it is. This is your mitochondria. Now you have both mitochondria in both plant and animal cells. Here it is in the animal cell. Here it is in the plant cell. And that's because both animals and plants go through cellular respiration. That's right. If you didn't know that, memorize that. Plants, photosynthesis, humans, and plants, cellular respiration. So when we are talking about photosynthesis, we are going to focus very much so on, the organelle that goes through photosynthesis. The organelle that does that is a chloroplast. And what organelle does cellular respiration is mitochondria. I just said both of those, so if you could write those down, that would be great. Here is our picture of the cell wall, which you learned in Science 10. Just looking pretty good. So the cell membrane is a semi-permeable membrane, meaning it allows really small molecules through, but it's very selective at what it chooses to let through. So there's a lot of important pieces to it. There's proteins, there's cholesterols, there's glycoproteins, there's peripheral proteins, there's the phospholipid head and the head and the tail. One is hydrophilic, one is hydrophilic, one likes water, one doesn't, right? So what you're looking at is the diagram of the cell membrane. I would like you to draw this diagram into your notes showing the phospholipid bilayer, because it's going to become important as we talk our way through transportation of materials across a membrane. Now, in the world of transportation of materials, you have three different types. You have what we call passive transportation, or what we call diffusion. And if it's with water, it's osmosis, or you have facilitated or active. Diffusion is just the natural movement from high to low concentrations. So essentially, someone stands in the back of the classroom, farts, you're eventually going to smell it at the front of the classroom. Diffusion. Better one is a candle. Maybe I should have used the candle example. But essentially, diffusion is just taking from high concentrations and as it passes along a gradient to low concentrations. Facilitated diffusion is similar, except now it uses little protein channels. So there's spaces in the actual phospholipid bilayer that have channels, and then things can pass through those channels and move across the membrane using the concentration gradient. I said earlier that the cell membrane only allows small things through. So this is an example of how larger molecules can get through. It goes from the outside of the cell to the inside. So again, it's following that high to low concentration, but unfortunately, it's just too big to fit through the phospholipid bilayer, so it uses protein channels instead. That is called facilitated, helping us do diffusion, facilitated. Active transport, on the other hand, is something completely different. It is also going to usually use some sort of channel, but this time it's using energy to go against the concentration gradient. So it's moving across a gradient, and it's using something called ATP to help you do that. In your notes, please make sure you filled in the blanks as well as drawn the pictures so you have a better idea of what is diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and active transport. So this is going to take us into the summarizing the ideas of the first two laws of thermodynamics. You guys have probably heard this multiple times by this point, but the first law of thermodynamics is energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It is changed from one form to the other. This is really key for photosynthesis and cellular respiration because they're so interconnected. What we create in photosynthesis is used in cellular respiration, and what we create in cellular respiration is used in photosynthesis. So we're not creating that energy, we're just passing it along between the two different processes. We cannot destroy it, we're maintaining that energy, we're just changing it along the way. And then the second law of thermodynamics is all about the loss of energy due to heat. And we're going to talk about that as we get into maintaining homeostasis within the body. We're going to lastly talk about probably the biggest idea in Bio 20 as an overarching concept, which is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This is the money of your body. It's cha-ching. It's the stuff that makes it go, okay? ATP is all about burning glucose. With the oxygen, you're making ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's a high energy molecule that powers your muscle contractions. It's what's made from cellular respiration. We use it in so many different things. So what it looks like is this lovely picture here. So if you flip your page in your notes, you'll notice there's a what is it? It's adenosine triphosphate. But how do we label it? So you can see on the far left side, there's the adenine. In the middle is a ribose. And then on the outside is a phosphate group. All right. Now, I don't really want to talk about the adenine and the ribose. Those are always there. But the phosphate groups is really what's important to this conversation. So when you have a phosphate group, you have three of them, hence why it's called triphosphate. There's three phosphates. And in order for ATP to release energy, we have to break those phosphate groups. So to break down ATP, you need to remove one of those phosphates from the structure. And when you do, you end up with something called ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. You'll notice there's a box in your note that explains that adenosine diphosphate contains two phosphates group. That is the lower energy molecule of ATP. When we form ATP, we are breaking and forming this bond right here. So ATP forms and stores this energy in the bond between the second and third phosphate. So when we make ATP, that energy is stored there. When we make ADP, when we're breaking apart ATP, that's where the energy is released from. And this is going to be where we're going to talk a lot more about the reduction and oxidization of molecules when we're gaining and losing electrons. All right. So these are all just quick information about photosynthesis, kind of the big pieces like ATP and what is kind of the first few laws of thermodynamics. So please make sure, again, that you have this all in your notes. Go back if you need to review, and I will talk to you soon.